Hi, 4th and 5th graders, here with Chains again. Today, yesterday we were learning about making predictions based on text evidence, and we're gonna continue doing that today. Today I'm going to teach you that good readers continue to think about how the story is going to end by using text evidence to make predictions. Watch me as I model how I think about and use the knowledge to help me make predictions. And notice how I use clues in the text to help me think about what is going to happen next. I am going to start on the top of page 242. Tuesday, December 24th through Wednesday, December 25th, 1776. Christmas is come, hang on the pot, let spits turn round and ovens be hot. Beef, pork, and poultry now provide to feast thy neighbors at this tide. Then wash all down with good wine and beer, and so with mirth conclude the year. Royal Virginia Almanac. The quote tells us that it's Christmas time, and I'm thinking of all the people who have little to nothing, because they're not going to have a lot to celebrate, and being without basic needs like food or shelter or clothing is going to make Christmas even a harder time for those people. I spent the day before Christmas fighting a holly bush with a pair of scissors. Madam required its twigs and berries for her decorating schemes. My morning dash to the prison, pump, and tavern had gone wonderful fast. There were no new messages to pass from Curzon's companion to Captain Morse, and the doctor secured by the rich Bridgebane family had delivered potions and bleeding to all, as promised. Curzon was spending most of his days sleeping, but he was not dead, and it was Christmas Eve day. The holly bits were tied with pine branches and set on the sills of the street-facing windows. Glass bowls of red berries were set on small tables in the drawing room, library, and the front parlor. Madam had 2 soldiers hang a ball of mistletoe in the front hall. This provided great merriment amongst the men and some blushing on the part of their wives. I had never seen a house decorated with tree branches to celebrate the birth of the baby Jesus, but it did pretty up the place. The best was when Madam told us to hang dried rosemary throughout. That cut right through the lingering stench of boots and belchings. In keeping with tradition, I was to have Christmas Day free from work. I pondered hard on what I should do with so many hours for myself. Christmas at home had been eating Mama's bread pudding with maple syrup and nutmeg, and reading the Gospel of Matthew out loud whilst Ruth played in Mama's lap. I was miles away from celebrating like that. I tried to bury the remembering, but it kept floating to the top of my mind like a cork in a stormy sea, and foolish tears spilled over. I finally decided to treat myself to a long stroll through all of New York, from the waterfront north to Chambers Street, and a side-to-side wander from the East River to the North River, which some had taken to calling the Hudson. For one day, my legs would be my own, not at the beck and call of others. On Christmas morning, Lady Seymour presented me with a new pair of black leather shoes that did not pinch any of my toes. Madam gave the soldier wives each a coin. She gave me nothing. When we returned home from the service at St. Paul's Chapel, Madam explained that my day off would begin as soon as I had finished serving the midday meal. Sarah had cooked it in advance, a sirloin of beef, smoked ham, onion pie, and a plum pudding for dessert. Master and Madam both filled up on the onion pie and hardly touched the fresh-baked bread. Lady Seymour ate enough for an undersized mouse. I ate porridge and beef for my Christmas dinner, a right curious combination, but a tasty one. As I cleared away the table, Madam informed me that my day off would begin after I brought in wood and washed up the dishes. Lady Seymour fired off a cannon blast of a glare at her, but Madam pretended not to notice, and the master kept his face planted in his newspaper. There had been heat rising between the 2 women for days. Madam was prepared to row the aunt to Charleston to get rid of her. After the meal, the master went to order the carriage to take them to some admiral's house for eggnog. Lady Seymour said she was going to rest and required nothing of me. As the lady limped to her chamber and the master disappeared down the stairs, I picked up the tray that held the last of the dishes. Madam poured herself another cup of tea. "One moment, girls," she said. I paused. "Yes, ma'am?" Madam said nothing while she stirred the sugar into her tea, She sipped, wrinkled her nose, added another spoonful, stirred, then sipped again. She set the teacup in the saucer and examined the walnut tarts on the plate before her. I stood like a statue holding the tray. Would she take away the rest of my day, force me to wash the table linens or starch the master's shirts? Madame gave her tea another stir. You have been idling around the Bridewell prison. My heart stopped. She picked up a tart, considered its scorched bottom, and returned it to the plate. My husband's aunt says that you visit the prison at her direction, bringing table scraps not good enough for pigs. She declared that forgiving and caring for the enemy is doing the Lord's work. My heart started up again, racing so fast I thought it might escape my body. Madame picked up a second tart and scratched off the scorched bits with her knife before taking a bite. She chewed, sipped more tea, and swallowed. My husband's aunt is a blithering idiot who has completely lost her wits. You should have told me of her request at once. She finally looked at me, her eyes cold as frozen coins. You represent this house, girl. Your visits could put us under suspicion of having rebel tendencies. I will be not ruined by you, be it through innocence, as Aunt proclaims, or insolence, which I suspect. I forbid you to go to the prison. My arms shook from the weight of the tray as well as her words. She could do anything, order me to the stocks, another branding, or a public whipping of hundreds of lashes. She could beat me herself. She could tell me she had done Ruth. She could sell me as she had done Ruth, only place me with the cruelest master who'd work me to death in days. A pearl of sweat trickled down my cheek. Madame finished the tart and wiped the corners of her mouth with her fingertip. While my husband's aunt lives here, my hands are tied. She reached for another tart. But she'll be soon gone, one way or another, and Elihu will be in England. She popped the entire tart into her mouth, chewed, then licked her fingers. That is the day you should fear, girl. After the carriage left and dishes were washed and Lady Seymour was sound asleep, I started my free day, still trembling from Madame's threat. How could I get word to Curzon that I couldn't bring food any longer? Would Dibdin let him starve if I stopped being his messenger? What if I ignored Madame's rule and continued to visit the Bridewell? I walked block after block pondering. I walked past the rope works and the brewery, to the orchards on the east side, silent under the snow. I walked past houses that had letters G.R. George Rex carved into the front door, property stolen in the name of the king. Like Madame had carved her letters into my soul, burned the mark into my skin. She can do anything, I can do nothing. The ashes of sadness and the buzzing bees of my melancholy all spun a storm inside of me, and I walked until my new shoes rubbed blisters all over my feet, and the blisters popped. I took off the shoes and walked in the snow. Once my feet were frozen up, the blisters didn't hurt. As the sun ran for the west, rowdy songs started up in the taverns and groggeries. I found myself on the shore of the North River, just above the Battery. Empty rowboats were tied up to a wharf. As the tide pulled out to the ocean, they bobbed and bumped against each other. A few lights twinkled across the water in faraway New Jersey. I thought of all the ancestors waiting at the water's edge for their stolen children to come home, waiting and waiting and waiting. A thought surfaced through my ashes. She cannot chain my soul. Yes, she could hurt me. She's already done so. But what was one more beating, a flogging even? I would bleed or not, scar or not, live or not. But she could no longer harm Ruth, and she could not hurt my soul, not unless I gave it to her. This was a new notion to me, and a curious one. A group of soldiers, singing loud as they could, swayed down the street, very muddy in drink. I hid in the shadows until they were gone, then headed back to Wall Street. I passed several houses filled with Christmas carols, joy to the world, and I saw 3 ships in the first Noel. A fat candle glowed on a parlor windowsill of a house on a corner, set there to guide someone home. When the book said that Isabel found herself on the shore of the North River, it made me think of the River Jordan, and I made a prediction. I think Isabel is going to cross her River Jordan. I think she's going to get her freedom. And when the book said that Madame Lockton could not chain Isabel's soul, I made a prediction. I think Isabel realizes that as long as she doesn't let Madame Lockton take her soul, she is free. Sometimes we think of one's soul as being made up of one's emotions, spirit, and pride. Some people say your soul is where your heart is. So what I'm wondering from you guys is, what do you think is in Isabel's heart? What does she care about? What is she proud of? I'll post those questions in our Google Classroom. I'm also wondering how Isabel can keep her soul from being chained by Madame Lockton. The Locktons and Lady Seymour were all retired for the night by the time I returned. The house was still empty of soldiers and their wives. I built up the fire in the hearth, set my shoes and damp stockings to dry in front of it, and rubbed a calendula salve on my blisters. Christmas, Mama's voice reminded. Keep Christmas. For the second time on the very same day, tears threatened. I rubbed them away and vowed not to cry again. 'Twas a nuisance. I found myself studying the loaf of bread on the table. A sharp knife showed up in my hand, and the loaf was soon cut into fat slices. A chipped crockery bowl appeared from the pantry, alongside the butter and eggs and milk and the sugar loaf and the nutmeg grater and the small amber flask. I baked me a maple syrup bread pudding in the Rhode Island style. While it cooked, I cleaned myself up good and proper. I thought about stealing a piece of Madame's rose-scented soap, but that would have made me smell like her. I preferred to smell like strong lye. I washed my arms and legs and the back of my neck and my ears and my face, and I dried myself with a soft, clean rag. I frowned as I stepped back into my clothes. I'd grown some, and they didn't fit proper. I'd let out the seams of the bodice as much as I could and taken out the hem of the skirt. Much more growing, and I'd look a right scandal. But I wouldn't think on that now. I was trying to make a Christmas. I pulled on my dry stockings and stepped into my new shoes, even though they rubbed fierce on the popped blisters. I put the bowl of bread pudding into a basket, tied on my cloak, and wound up my hands and rags to keep the frost from biting. I walked out the back door. It was not yet midnight, so in truth, 'twas still the day I could call my own. I set my path westward to the burned-over district, to Canvastown. The line where September's fire had stopped was sharp cut, first a house with no damage, next a house still bearing black streaks of soot and smoke, then a field of ruin, with makeshift hovels crafted from tent, brick, and scorched timbers. Rats nibbled on frozen garbage heaps. The smell of the fire still lingered, tainted with the smell of filth and decay. But in the bleakness, there were spots of hope. A wreath was stuck on the front of a tent. Children's clothes hung from a clothesline, stiff with ice, but still sweet-looking. A buttered churn stood watch over a neat stack of fresh split wood. Smoke swirled slow from the top of the chimney, dipped at the roofline, then rose up to the stars. I lifted my face to the sky, and for the first time in much too long, I prayed. I prayed as hard as I could, without words or shapes or fancy talking. I just prayed. When I was done, I felt cleaner than I had after my bath. I walked on until I found a hut built against a lone brick wall. From inside came sounds of a family, the papa's low rumble, the mama's bright laugh, and giggling children who had been allowed to stay up much too late and who did not want to fall asleep. I greeted them through the piece of canvas that served as their front door. The hovel fell silent, then the canvas was pushed aside, and the father stepped out, a musket in his hand. His wife came right behind him, though he told her to stay inside. It took some convincing to explain my mission, but I spoke polite and firm and held out the bread pudding, and the children snuck out in their night clothes and just about dove into the bowl. The mother took the basket and said thank you, and then thank you again, and then thank you most kindly, and they went back inside. I hummed a carol as I walked away, finally feeling at peace. Chapter 39. Thursday, December 26th through Tuesday, December 31st, 1776. In the army at present, merit is measured only by rank. Those who are high in rank are clever fellows. The low are small folks, and those who have none at all like us are poor devils. We are nobodies. We have nothing. Samuel Tenney writing to his friend Peter Turner about his frustration with the privileges of officers. This quote tells me that in the Army there are those that are privileged and those that are in the lower rank. It reminds me of the very rich versus the very poor. Sometimes it just doesn't seem fair that some people can have so much while others have so little. 2 days later, Sarah had me go with her to the fish market. Her back was hurting her fierce, and I was to carry the cod and halibut needed for a fish chowder. The market was crowded with folk whose cupboards had been cleaned out by the Christmas feasting, and Sarah muttered rude things. Her growing discomfort had put her in a constant temper. The cod was easy enough to purchase, but stall after stall turned up no halibut. Sarah insisted that haddock or catfish would not do, so we marched on. The air was thick with the cries of the stall owners promising the juiciest fish, the freshest fish, and fish fit for the king himself. Before dawn, I had made the trip to the Tea-Water pump, but I had not dared visit the prison or Captain Morse's tavern. I was still confuddled about what to do. My thoughts wandered. I did not realize that Sarah had moved ahead of me in the crowd until a great shout went up. An oyster seller's cart had overturned in front of the carp stall, and the two men were hollering at each other. The crowd halted, and I had no place to turn. Sarah's white cloth cap bobbed away in the distance as I looked for a path out of the crowd. But bodies pushed in from all sides to watch the two men arguing. When a hand grabbed my arm, I gasped. "Apologies, Just Sal," Captain Morse said as he released me. His eyes were tired, but his cheeks were flushed. My mouth gaped open like that of a fish breathing its last. I shook my head. He couldn't talk to me in view of all. There was no mistaking what he was. Dressed in that brown and white coat, I turned first one way, then the other. But bodies were packed around me tight as could be. Morse kept his eyes on the arguing men, but leaned his face close enough to mine that I could hear him whisper, "We must talk." Sarah had realized I was no longer with her. Her cap stopped, then slowly started back toward us. Her husband was a British gunner. If she saw me talking to a rebel officer— "Go away," I muttered. "I have news for my men." The oyster seller picked up a carp and shook it in the other man's face. The crowd laughed. Sarah plowed toward me. "I beg you," Morse whispered, "please." Soldiers appeared on the edge of the crowd to restore order. "Come up to the tavern." Yes, I told the captain. "I'll come this afternoon. Now go away." The crowd melted under the eyes of the armed soldiers. The carp seller was explaining the ruckus to a sergeant while the oyster seller reloaded his cart. Sarah kicked oysters out of her way as she approached. "Where in the name of all that's holy did you get to?" she asked. "I was trapped in the crowd," I said. "I called, but you could not hear me." She grunted and handed me a small fish with glassy eyes. "This will have to do. Halibut is rare as hen's teeth today." I settled it in the basket atop the fat cod and followed Sarah as she headed away from the market. We walked in silence for a few blocks, her concentrating on her huffing and puffing, me trying to figure if I dared go up to the tavern. The sky promised more snow. How long would Dibdin wait before reclaiming Curzon's hat and blanket? We crossed the street. "Miss Sarah, ma'am?" I asked, sweet as honey. "What is it?" I chose my words with care. "Has Madame Lockton said anything about me in your hearing?" She tilted her head a bit as she looked at me. "Aye, this morn, matter of fact. Said you wasn't allowed to go to that blasted water pump. Said I should send one of the other girls, even though the sun not be up at that time of day, even though the streets be covered in ice." Sarah reached for my elbow as we trod upon a slick patch of cobblestones. "But I like getting out," I said, "and I don't mind the chore." We reached a stretch where ashes had been thrown onto the ice, and the going was safer. "I don't answer to her," Sarah said as she released my arm. "I answer to the King's army. I'd be right pleased if you kept fetching the water. Makes my life easier." She stopped and put her hands on her back, breathing heavily. Her baby belly was so big she could have loaded it in a wheelbarrow and pushed it in front of her. She caught me studying her and gave a quick smile. "The babe will come soon," she said. "It'll be a joyous day," I said. "I'll keep getting the water, but—" "But what? Could you please not tell Madam?" Sarah stretched to the one side and winced. "What she don't know won't hurt her. It's not like she's up at that hour anyways." After the midday meal, I contrived to overturn the pitcher that held the tea water, dumping it on the floor. "Clumsy dolt," Hannah scolded as I knelt to clean the floor with rags. "Don't be looking at me to trudge up there and get more for her high mightiness," Mary said from her chair by the window. She squinted and sewed another stitch. "I've got to hem these breeches before the light fades." "I'll run up and fetch it," I said. "Double time, I promise."